Hello everyone. Welcome back to our channel Canada Immigration. We hope you're doing great. Today, in this episode, we'll discuss the processing time for study visas, work visas, and visitor visas. So, to get all the information, pay attention and watch the video through to the end. Please hit the like, subscribe, and don't forget to push the notification bell for upcoming episodes. So, without any further delay, let's jump into the video. The most well-known natural landmark, Niagara Falls, welcomes millions of tourists each year. Include places like Toronto, Quebec City, Montreal, etc. as travel destinations. You may already be getting ready to go to Canada. Well, let us begin with, what is Canada processing time? The processing time frames indicate how long, on average, it should take them to process your application. When they receive an application, a processing period begins, and it ends when they make a decision. The clock starts when your application enters the mailroom if you submit it by mail. It begins when you submit your application. Whether you do it in person or online, you must possess a valid travel document. A passport is required, as well as sufficient means to support you and your family while you are in Canada. To ensure that the application process may begin as soon as possible, you must submit all the necessary paperwork. The processing time can be impacted by several variables, including the type of application submitted. The application is complete. How quickly they process applications they've already received. How easily they can verify your information. How long do you take to respond to any request or concerns about other factors? Moving on to Canada visitor visa processing times. The processing period for visitors from India to Canada after applying for a visitor visa is 155 days. Many of the older applications are still being processed. You might not have to wait as long as the processing period indicated above if you apply today. The backlog and processing delays for Indian tourist visas to Canada are both being actively reduced. Remember that you can't successfully apply for a Canada tourist visa from India if you don't have the required paperwork. Be aware that a little error on your visa application might result in a longer processing period or a visa being refused. Therefore, to reduce the processing time for your Canada tourist visa, always verify that the information you supply matches what is on your passport. You could be required to submit your fingerprints and photo biometrics together with your Canada visa application if you are an Indian national. This processing time for a visiting visa to Canada from India excludes 1. The time it takes to send an application between a visa application center and the Canada Immigration Office. 2. The time you need to give your biometrics. Coming to Canada tourist visa. Your tourist visa for Canada will be attached with an official document called a visiting visa, sometimes referred to as a temporary residence visa. It will demonstrate that you are eligible to enter Canada. The majority of visitors from nations without electronic travel authorization or visa exemption must get a visitor visa to enter Canada. Learn more about the tourist visa for Canada, the costs, qualifications, conditions, and documentation needed for visas. The processing period for a Canadian tourist visa for an Indian person applying from India is 155 days. It is suggested that if you start your application early, you might not wait until the processing days, because the Canadian government is actively striving to minimize both the backlog and the processing time for tourist visas to Canada. At the present, the government is still processing a significant number of older applications. As a result, you could be required to provide biometric information with your application. Take notice that the processing time for a Canada tourist visa from India does not include 1. The time it takes to send the application between a Canada visa application center and the Canadian Visa Office. 2. The time you need to give your biometrics. Next is study permit processing time. Canada. An IRCC-issued study permit gives Indian nationals permission to enroll in a program of study at a Canadian educational institution for the duration of the program. It outlines the student's obligations, including when they must depart, and whether their movement inside Canada is limited. More information on the Canada study visa is available. The costs, qualifications, conditions, and documentation needed for visas. The study permit is a legal document that the Canadian government gives to let foreign students study at designated learning institutions. They're to study in Canada. the majority of foreign nationals require a study permit before applying. Make sure you have all the required paperwork. Applying is a must before entering Canada through the Student Direct stream. You can expedite the processing of your study permit in Canada if you are an Indian national. They make an effort to handle Canada SDS applicants for study permits in less than 20 days. Some applications, though, can take longer. You must, to expedite the processing of your Canadian study permit. Give your biometrics as soon as possible. Meet all the Canadian eligibility criteria requirements. Next, moving on to Canada Temporary Resident Visa processing time. The processing period for a temporary residence visa to Canada while applying in India is 155 days. Many of the older applications are still being processed. If you apply today, you might not have to wait as long as the time is shown above for processing your temporary residence visa for Canada. Both the backlog and the processing time for temporary residence visas for Canada from India are being actively reduced. Remember that you can't successfully apply for a Canada temporary residence visa from India if you don't have the right paperwork. Be aware that a little error on your visa application might result in a longer processing period or a visa being refused. Therefore, to reduce the processing time for your Indian temporary resident visa to Canada, always verify that the information you supply matches what is on your passport. You could be required to submit your fingerprints and photo biometrics together with your Canada visa application if you are an Indian national. This processing time for temporary residence visas to Canada from India excludes 1. The time it takes to send an application between a visa application center and the Canada Immigration Office. 2. The time you need to give your biometrics. Finally, Canada Work Permit visa process time. You require a work permit if you are a citizen of India. Depending on your circumstance, you might qualify for an employer-specific work permit. A favorable labor market impact assessment must be obtained by your Canadian employer before you submit your visa application. A TFW program document from Employment and Social Development Canada or Service Canada is required for the hiring of a foreign worker. It must be demonstrated through a labor market impact assessment (LMIA) that there is a need for foreign workers to fill the position, since neither Canadian citizens nor permanent residents are qualified to undertake the job. An open work permit is not position specific, it is not occupation specific. You won't need the LMIA from Employment and Social Development Canada when you apply if you have an open work visa. More information about the Indian work visa for Canada is available. The costs, qualifications, conditions, and documentation needed for visas. The processing time for a work permit in Canada from outside the country, while you are in India, is 44 weeks. They are giving applicants for crucial jobs priority. Your Canada Work Permit visa application process time may thus take more than 44 weeks. If you're not applying to work in a profession that is in high demand, your fingerprints and photo biometrics may need to be submitted together with your application for a work visa in Canada. This time frame for obtaining a visa for a work permit in Canada excludes the time it takes to send an application between a Canada work visa for the Indian Application Centre and the Canadian Government Office. The time you need to give your biometrics. That is all we have for today in this episode. What are your thoughts on this? Please let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching the entire episode. Hopefully, the information is useful to you. See you later in the next episode. Till then, take care.